You're listening to episode 50, chapter 5 of the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast. I'm Chris Lamberth.
And I'm Josh Havens, and we're on a journey to learn what it means to live a lifestyle of discipleship. We're glad you're joining us and hope that as you set aside this time for God, that He would help you grow today in the everyday moments of life.
And today we are here with our follow-up Friday segment, and if you can see, maybe you're listening to it on a podcast player, but if you're watching it on YouTube, then you obviously notice that Josh and I are on video today. Yes, the video podcasts could be coming back. This is kind of a test run to see what everything looks like, if we like it, if this is sustainable. So yeah.
If you're listening to this on a podcast player, go check it out on YouTube and at least let us know what you think. And if you want to see more content like this, it'd be really helpful.
It would be. We'll bring it to you. We'll give you all the content you want. Anyway, so today we are following up with our conversation with Justin Zoradi about his book, Made for These Times, and his work with These Numbers Have Faces. And this was a really, really great conversation. Number one, I just love talking with Justin. Like,
he's a really fun guy to talk to, really engaging.
Yeah, just his passion and energy.
It's like you've known him for years and you just sit down and have a conversation with him.
Yeah, and so it's always a joy to talk with guests that are like that, and many of our guests are like that.
Mm-hmm.
But Justin's just a great guy to talk to. And man, he challenged me in so many ways over the course of this conversation, and then especially over the course of reading his book. I don't really know where to begin about how to follow up anywhere. I think let's talk maybe about big strokes as far as the themes that came out in this episode. We knew we wanted to talk with Justin because a lot of the stuff in his book, although he's focusing on entrepreneurial stuff and a startup guide to calling, like it instantly it becomes really clear really fast how much you cannot jump all the way to step 4, serving with purpose and following your vocational call, without having done the other 3 steps in front of it.
Yep. And really, I mean, we've known all along that it's about identity and relationships. And I think the cool thing is that the more people we talk to, the more we realize that really, as adults, we get into our 20s and we have these moments where we're like, we're going to go conquer the world and we're going to do all these big, great things for the kingdom of God or for ourselves if we're not really focusing on the right things. But then we have this moment, late 20s, early 30s, where all of a sudden we realize, I can't do it this way and it's just not going to work. And all of a sudden you have an identity crisis because the work that you were doing was validating who you thought you were, and you have to decide, well, am I going to continue being that person, or am I going to be the person that God says I am?
Mm-hmm.
And am I going to be a person who is satisfied with what He's given me?
Yeah.
Which is a totally different way to look at doing big things for Jesus.
Yeah, and it's still a really tricky process that we're trying to figure out. I mean, me especially, I think at least every other week I'm coming to you and talking to you about something related to this issue.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to get trapped in the space and the way of thinking that, if I'm doing these things, then the things that I do are who I am because I'm the guy that does those things.
Yep.
Like that's how you start defining your identity. But it's so helpful and refreshing to read a book like this. And again, I love we hit it pretty much in every chapter just about in our intros and outros.
We did, yeah.
To talk about this idea between resume virtues and eulogy virtues. I think that helps put things in perspective a whole lot. Like, I love being versus doing. It's great to talk about, but they're pretty abstract concepts, especially being.
Yeah.
By definition, it's kind of an abstract concept. But thinking about the things you can simply ask yourself, am I trying to do this thing so that I can add it to my resume, and then because it's added on my resume, people will like me more or think I'm more important or something like that? That can be a really good red flag for saying, wait a second, need to pause, slow down, back up, and evaluate what's really going on here in my life to really understand, why am I pursuing the things that I'm pursuing?
Mm-hmm.
In this case, maybe it's trying to, make sure an organization is well-funded and people can go to school. All of those things, great things to do, right? We're worried every single week about producing a podcast episode.
Yep.
But we struggle, and we have to make sure that we come back to the thing that, like, what we do, even in this podcast, and hopefully it serves many people, is not who we are.
Yeah.
It becomes an extension, an outflow of who we are.
And I think really one of the things that struck me during this conversation with Justin is thinking of being and doing, or resume and eulogy virtues, in terms of relationships. We can get really caught up in doing things and putting things on our resume. And we can get so caught up in those things that we disconnect them from the relationships and the people they're actually serving.
Mm-hmm.
Where if we focus more on those eulogy virtues, those things are just by nature relational.
Yeah.
And it's a lot more difficult to separate those from the people that we're actually working with and serving. And so if we can make a shift and start thinking of investing into these eulogy virtues and growing in the everyday moments of life in those areas, you can't help but do those kind of things in relationship with other people.
Yeah.
Which is like identity, practicing the basics, walking with someone, serving with purpose, all rolled up into one.
That's right.
It's like a nice package.
Yeah. And the irony is the more you focus on the eulogy virtues, I think the better outfitted your resume is going to be.
Yeah, because you're building on those everyday moments of life. If like we talked about in chapter 4, if you take the time to invest in putting your shopping cart back, or smiling at the people that you're walking by in the store, or being kind to your coworkers, stuff like that, being faithful in those things over a lifetime is a big, big thing.
Yeah. And
that's a whole lot of doing. That's a whole lot to put on your resume.
Yeah.
And all you did was focus on the everyday moments of life.
That's right. It's those small, I'm reminded of the quote from Gandalf in the movie Lord of the Rings. It's the small, little, everyday moments. I don't think I'm going to appropriate the quote. I'm going to not get it correct. That he thought brought about the greatest change in the world, as opposed to Sauron's, big, great, powerful displays of strength, which again I'm naturally drawn towards. But
that's why the hobbits took the ring to Mordor. And that kind of leads into the other thing that I found really helpful with this in this conversation with Justin. Here we have a guy who spent more than a decade investing into a company that he founded, and he's now faced with this decision to step back from that company entirely.
Mm-hmm.
And as he mentioned, that was a real identity crisis for him. He poured so much of who he was into this company, and now he was giving it up.
Yeah.
But what he found in that was something so powerful, because God called him to rest.
Mm-hmm.
And it really resonated with me, because here he is in his backyard creating Endor, a place where he can just go and relax and be.
Yeah.
And I find that really, really encouraging when I'm tempted to think that every single season of my life has to just be a constant go, 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 go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I must confess on the podcast before you and our audience and God and everyone, I'm just a little jealous of Endor. Like, I want my own personal Endor. Like, anyway.
I'm going to go build one at some point.
But we've each experienced similar transitions in our lives. Maybe not to the point where we've built a company over 10 years and had to give it up. But obviously you're very open about your story of leaving Global, going to Iowa, and then coming back. I think there was 2 transitions in there that you had to cope with both times. But I'm also thinking about our transition from doing or out of doing Theology in Progress. And although, for various reasons we had to give that up, that was not a very easy thing, because both of us had pieces of our identity wrapped up in there. That was represented.
That was our first baby.
Exactly. And we had a lot of time and effort wrapped up into that thing.
Yeah.
And we took about a year and a half or 2 years, I forget exactly what it is, off. But during that time off, God was doing something really deep in our hearts. Like, we never lost that passion for doing podcasting, for creating content and resources to help people grow in their walk with God. And eventually it birthed Daily Growth Discipleship. And so what we're able to do now is an outgrowth of our time of resting, although sometimes it doesn't feel like rest, because we were kind of forced to take a break because of chaos in our life.
We were.
But that's different seasons of life give way to different seasons of life. And so
Yeah.
where we needed to rest in doing like what is largely our side gig is this doesn't pay the bills for us. We needed to focus on our primary job for the time being. And then we've been able to transition back a little bit more, even though I don't think the chaos ever stopped.
No,
I think the passion for this just burned brighter.
Yeah, the question is, did we actually learn from that season of not doing as much? And I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we have. Sometimes I feel like we haven't. God's sovereign anyway. He's patient and he continues to train and lead us and guide us. And
absolutely,
man, I thank God we don't have to have it all figured out.
Yeah, and you know what? It's like today, like when we're coming up and we're setting up a video studio and we're trying this thing out. Like we're having fun.
Yeah.
If nothing else, we had fun doing it. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a good testament to, and maybe a good barometer for, are you following God's path for your life? Like, are you enjoying it? It's not that you're going to enjoy it every single time.
Not that it has to be, not that you have to find happiness in every single moment of it.
Yes, exactly.
It's joy. It's a fulfillment. And
yep.
I find this very satisfying, even though it's at times painful kind of a thing.
And that's another paradox that we touched on in this conversation with Justin, is that the happiest moments in our life often come from those times when we do experience some level of struggle. Like no struggle at all is incredibly boring. And
you never grow.
And you never grow, exactly. Like you need to be pushing on the edge of your comfort zone if you really want growth to take place. And I've come to believe, and at least for my own life this is true, and I think it is true for all of human life, is that without a certain level of growth, and then therefore that tension that's pushing you to grow, like you're just not going to find satisfaction and happiness.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not going to be there.
It's funny. I'm actually reading through the Silmarillion, and I got to the point where Tolkien is describing how men were created differently from elves. Elves were created to live immortal through the entire existence of Arda and just kind of be content with that. Whereas men, they were given very short lifespans, but they were created to have desires beyond Arda, always wanting to move into something more, always wanting to gain something more and grab something more. And so men are created with this desire to always do something else beyond. And there was this inherent struggle created within them that was always going to put them at odds with everything else in nature, in Tolkien's world, and at odds with the elves, and just because they were looking for something more. But because of that, they had this ability to grasp things in creation in a way that the elves couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really great observation on Tolkien's part, because we really do grow best when we're struggling in some way or another. And I don't think our entire lives are meant to be a struggle, but there's this good God-given aspect that we have that is made to work better when we're pushing through something.
Yeah. Since we're digging in on the nerd culture stuff, I'll talk about my example of The Matrix. And I love that Agent Smith is talking to Morpheus at the sort of almost the end of the first one, and he's talking about the different versions of the Matrix that have produced. And the first version was a perfect paradise. And, whole crops of humans were lost because they couldn't accept that life could be that perfect. Like there's just something about life that if we just were able to actually sit on the couch forever, like there's part of us that dies. We become less human. We really, that's when real depression and things like that can set in. And instead there needs to be some sort of struggle. And so for, the machines in the Matrix, they devised this whole idea of we would give them just enough hope that they could get out of the Matrix, that it would be that struggle. It would represent that system. And, but for us, man, we don't have to invent that. Number one, sin and everything else exists in our life that causes that struggle. And in Christ, that's the stuff that Christ wants to genuinely overcome. But I think partially due to sin, and then partially just it's how God designed us as being human. We are always going to be pushing up against pieces of ourselves that we didn't realize were there, that we can grow because they're there. Like we're going to have an ego that in every season and every phase of our life that we're going to need to conquer and overcome. And again, like ego is a great one because it always hides, and is the moment you think that you've got it licked and you've finished is the moment that a new bout is about to begin. Exactly. And so, but like, again, like sin is at the root of that thing, but it's not necessarily because of a sinful action of somebody doing it against you. But like, if you're going to be Justin and you're going to build the company, you're going to have to struggle deeply with your ego and make sure that there's moments when you can say, wait a second, I need to step back out of this thing. It's not about me. It's more about the good that the company, the organization, or whatever the situation is that's going on. And so that's going to be a moment for growth. Sin isn't necessarily directly involved in that moment. At that moment, it's just you needing to learn good Christ-like character and say, wait a second, this moment isn't about me. How can I see God's will and God's glory be done in this moment? So that's just an example. But I think that's a really powerful way of thinking about growth, even in times when you think growth doesn't matter.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast. To find out more about Justin's work, check out justinzoradi.com. If you like what you've heard this week, give us a review on Apple Podcasts or the podcast player you use. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to stay up to date on everything happening at Daily Growth Discipleship, go to dailygrowthdiscipleship.com and subscribe for free. You can also subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify.